are in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamorim, Tafshin Yud Aleph, Tafshin Yud Beis, in the middle of, towards the end of the Mamar of Purim, Tafshin Yud Aleph. Today is Sunday. It is Yud Zayin Tevis, Tafshin Ayin Gimel, and we are on page Mem Zayin, at the very top, Vizehu. Just as a quick summary, we have been learning about the innovation of Matan Torah. Matan Torah introduced the fusion between the physical and the spiritual. Right? Number one. Number two, the way that takes place is through the nullification of the defining characteristics of the physical and the spiritual. We brought the example of Malach Michol and Malach Gavriel, Eisa Shalom B'mreimov. God makes peace on high. How? By reducing their differences and highlighting that which they have in common, and that is the fact that they're both messengers of Hashem. Similarly, when we talk about the combination of the physical and the spiritual, we're talking about overriding their particular defining characteristics. This idea also exists in man's service of Hashem, in the fulfillment of mitzvahs and the learning of Torah. We spoke about three levels: the tachton, the low way of fulfilling mitzvahs, the low way of learning Torah; the elyon, the higher way of fulfilling mitzvahs, the higher way of learning Torah; and then that which is greater than the two, both in mitzvahs and in Torah. And from this we came to the conclusion why it was necessary to have actual self-sacrifice in order to bring the process of the giving of the Torah to its state of wholesomeness, to the state of shleimus, of completeness. Why? Because the idea is that it should also reach the very lowest levels. The Rebbe explained towards the end a finer point. In other words, up until the last section, the Rebbe was discussing that the combination of the upper and the lower comes as a result of overriding their differences, not paying attention to the differences, finding a way how their differences should make no difference, how their differences should not interfere. Bittul, nullification. The point that Rebbe is making, though, is that ultimately the idea is that the very highest levels should find expression in the very lowest levels. In other words, when we're talking about the fusion of bittul, for example, when we brought Malach Mechol and Malach Gavriel, Eisa Shalom B'mreimov, God makes peace on high. So what's the vort? What's the point? Michol and Gavriel did not change. Michol remained the host of water, Gavriel remained the host of fire. It's just that it overrides, God's overwhelming presence overrides their differences, and they're able to combine. But this remained fire, this remained water. Ultimately, the idea is that the very highest should find expression in the fire, in the water. So, in other words, when we talk about it in the person, ultimately the idea is not the bittul of the person, to be mevatel, to annul the characteristics of the lower one. We're not looking to turn the lower one into a spiritual being, into a higher one. The idea is that the very highest level should find expression in the low one, in his characteristics, in his defining features.
How does it apply to fire and water, which will still remain fire and water?
It does not. It applies, that's exactly the point. By Mechol Gavriel, it's only bittul. By a yid, we're talking about, when we talk about Lishma, for example, the learning Torah Lishma, or even fulfilling mitzvahs Lishma, but let's talk about learning Torah, because that was the prime example that Rebbe brought, where you find that point more than any of the examples that Rebbe gave, that the limitlessness of the power which is greater than the two finds expression in the human being, to the extent that all limits that are related to knowing Torah for the purpose of knowing how you should behave, or the mitzvah of knowing as much of the Torah as you can, or even the mitzvah of toiling in Torah day and night, Torah Lishma goes beyond all of that. So the ultimate expression, so that finds expression in the tachton, in the low one, in his defining characteristics. Similarly, when we talk about Purim, says Nefesh, what was the point that everyone was making? Although at Matan Torah there was Nasa, we will do under all circumstances, but it did not find expression in Poyel, in the Guf, in the Tachtin. When they stood the entire year at Purim in a state of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, that is when Torah, Matan Torah, found expression in the Tachtin. That's why Purim is so, and that's the point that I was going to spell out over here. Before we get to that, we're still in the process. So in other words, we're talking about bittul, the nullification of the Tachtin, and then we're talking about mitzias, the existence, the being, the defining characteristics of the Tachtin. Right? So still here we're in the process of discussing the bittul, the nullification of the Tachtin, on the top of page Mem Zayin. This is also the reason why through the self-sacrifice of Purim, specifically, that brought the conclusion and the completeness into the process of the receiving of the Torah, through the fact that on Purim, during Purim, their bittul, their nullification was also from the body's perspective, because there, as mentioned before, there was an existential threat directly on their bodies, as opposed to Hanukkah, where the existential threat to the existence, the physical existence of the Jew, was a byproduct of the direct decree of not fulfilling mitzvahs, the godly mitzvahs. Whereas on Purim, the threat was an existential threat, directly. So specifically Purim, the nullification that the Jews faced then was also from the perspective of the body, from the very lowest. Therefore, they were then vessels. They were able to receive the revelations of Matan Torah, both from the perspective of the soul and also from the perspective of the body. Now, if you remember in the very beginning, one of the questions the Rebbe asked was, why does the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, find it necessary in his Maimer to point out that during the era of Purim, during the period of Purim, Bnei Yisrael were at the lowest ebb also physically? That was one of the questions that the Rebbe asked before. Why is it important to mention that they were in the lowest level also physically? So the Rebbe says, according to this, we will understand it. We could say, that is what the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in his Maimer, in his Chassidic discourse, upon which this Maimer of the Rebbe is based. The previous Rebbe finds it necessary to point out that during the time of the decree of Purim, the Bnei Yisrael, Jews, were at the very lowest level also physically. Why is that important? With this he hints, the reason with this he wants to hint that during Purim they were vessels to receive, they were receptacles, they became fit to receive the very highest levels of the revelations that took place at Sinai, also from the body's perspective. Why? Because of the fact that then they were at a very low state, even physically. It means that the Gili, the revelation that followed, the actualization that took place at Purim, through their self-sacrifice, penetrated even the very lowest levels. Yud Aleph. Now we're going into this point where the Rebbe is going to talk about the difference between the bittul dimension, the nullification dimension of the tachtin, of the low one, and the mitzias, and then finding expression not only in the nullification of the low one, but also the actual existence and the defining characteristics of the loan. The point that I just made a few moments ago.
What is the practicality of that? In their lives, it's not in their physical bodies, it's actually in their lives.
In their physical life.
In
their actualized way of living.
Right.
They actually experienced self-sacrifice at the time.
Right.
In an actual way. That is...
I mean, know that obviously the whole Purim thing, everything was turned over.
Right, ultimately. But why? Because they stood in the actual state of Mesiras Nefesh at that time. So in other words, there was a threat to their physical life, directly, not as a byproduct of, if you won't do this, we're threatening your life. It was Gzeira against their lives, their physical lives, which means that their guf was hefker. That was the expression that I used before. So the threat was directly to the physical existence, and the response was that notwithstanding that threat in their physical existence, they lived in a state of total dedication to Torah and to Hashem. So that's the expression of the tacht and the guf. Now, in Yud Aleph, based on that which was explained, according to that which we explained in chapter 4, That in the combination of the higher and the lower, there are three matters. There are three components. Component 1, ha'elyon, the upper one. Hatachton, component 2, the low one. And component 3, v'habitul shalahem, the nullification of the two, right? That was the recurring theme. Move on, it's understood from this. Shebechdei lizkes lahagmar v'ashlemis the Kabbalah Satayra. In order to merit to the conclusion and to the wholesomeness of receiving of the Torah, bringing that process to its state of fullness, ein maspik habitul danashama daguf. It's not enough that the soul and the body are nullified, that we don't reckon, that the soul says, you know what, I'm fulfilling mitzvahs not because I want to connect to Hashem, I'm fulfilling mitzvahs only because it's Hashem's desire. In other words, I'm not reckoning with my motivation. Or from the Tachtin's perspective, the Tachtin saying, the Lama saying, I'm not reckoning with my guf, v'nefesh hativis, but I'm doing it for a higher ideal. In that sense, what is it? I'm leaving the defining features of the low one. I'm leaving the defining features of the high one. Bittul, nullification. That's not sufficient. Right? The ultimate idea is not mesiras nefesh and giving away your life. The idea is to live that way. Right? That the very highest levels, in other words, the power that is superior to the two, to the Tachtin and to the Elyon, should find expression in the very low one. There needs to be their existence in their defining characteristics. As they are in their fullest state of completeness. And that this existence, in their defining character, should be connected and tied and fused with Torah at the very highest level. Similar to what was explained before in chapter 4 and chapter 8, that if you remember in Torah, when he spoke about the three levels, he spoke about knowing Torah for the purpose of knowing how to behave in daily life. That was the tachton, the low way of learning Torah. Then there was a higher way of learning Torah for the sake of knowing as much Torah as possible. Then there was even a higher level, which is the one beyond both of them. Toiling Torah day and night. But then the Rebbe said, even that is not the ultimate. The ultimate is Torah Lishma. Learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah, which goes beyond all of those. And that finds expression to push the person to the greatest extent of limitlessness possible within the confines of a human being. So just like we said concerning Torah, similar is over here. Just like we explained concerning Torah in chapter 4, chapter 6 and chapter 8. That the advantage, the qualitative advantage of learning Torah Lishma, learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah over the other three, even beyond the level of Hagis, so toiling Torah day and night, it's not only that over here, when you learn Torah Lishma, Torah for the sake of learning Torah, the bittul, the nullification of the person is greater than in any other way of learning Torah. That his learning is not for his to bring any wholesomeness, any completeness in the person. Also not to bring the soul to any state of completeness. So in other words, we're not only talking about bittul, we're not talking only about nullification. Ella, what did we say when we were explaining the idea of Torah Lishma? We explained we explained that through learning Torah Lishma, what did Rebbe explain? That when a person learns Torah for the sake of learning Torah, the defining characteristics, the existence of the person, the presence of the person, connects to what? To the very essence of Torah. Meaning what? His neshama, his soul, and his body, in their defining features, as they are neshamas and guf, a neshama and a guf, they combine with the very highest levels. Which, what happens then? Through this, the person leaves his limitations and is raised up to the limitlessness of Torah. Similarly, that is the idea that we want. That is what had to happen at Purim. What had to happen at Purim? Not the removal of the defining features, but rather in the defining features of the Jewish people as they were, there the very highest level should find expression. How did that happen? We could say, says the Rebbe, the Zeh Shemevi Ba'Maimer, Sheis Eidos Nefesh Yisrael Hoysal De Mordechai. The previous Rebbe brings in his Maimer that who aroused the Yidden to have Mesiras Nefesh? Mordechai. Mordechai was what? Moshe Shebedayda, the Moshe of his generation. And Mordechai was the embodiment of the very, very highest levels finding expression in his actual guf. In other words, Mordechai in his life attained that state of shleimus, of wholesomeness, where like Torah Lishma. In other words, not only the bittul, not only the nullification of his limitations, but rather that the very highest levels found expression is in his neshama and his guf. In other words, Mordechai actually lived that way. So he was the embodiment of this ideal, of the fusion of the very highest and the very lowest in his actual life, right? So through the fact that Mordechai lived that way, was that way, and he was the Moshe Shebedei Moshe in his generation, which means the Torah learning of Mordechai was at the very highest level, as we explained now. He was the embodiment of Torah Lishma, Torah for the sake of learning Torah. So through the fact that Mordechai was the one that awakened, that inspired the Jews to learn Torah with total self-sacrifice, especially, particularly since Mordechai was the head of the generation, similar to Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the head of his generation, and Mordechai was the Moshe of his generation, which means that Mordechai was the head of the body of the Jewish people, and the head is the one that draws the life force brings the life force into the rest of the body, into all the limbs, meaning into all the Yidden, into all the Jews of his generation. So through this, through this he drew down into the Jewish people of his generation, not only this idea of nullifying, not caring, not paying attention to their limitations, and to have self-sacrifice, which means not only bittul, he brought into them not only bittul, he also infused them with the qualitative advantage of learning Torah as it is from the perspective of the person's state of completeness, meaning to say, to find expression in the actual defining characteristics of the individuals, of the people, which means Hashlemis Neshama Guf, bringing the soul and the body of all the Yidden in his generation to their fullest state of completeness, to find their ultimate expression. Right? Why? Because Mordechai was the embodiment of that, and he inspired them in the same way. It's similar to what we discussed. I guess the idea is similar to what we discussed in one of the previous shurim concerning the mitzvah of Hakel. Right? Every 8th year on Sukkot, there was a mitzvah that all the Jewish people, men, women, and children, everybody had to gather in Yerushalayim. And what happened? The king read from the Torah. What did he read? He read Shema Yisrael and another few passages, right? No, there was no fire and brimstone. That's what happened. The king read from the Torah. And the Chinuch brings that this is a very, very fundamental pillar in the Jewish religion, because this inspired Yiras Shamayim, fear of God, to the Jewish people, and inspired them with godliness and so on and so forth. Frekt sich Hakasha. We hear the Torah every day, every 3 times a week. Monday, Thursday, Shabbos, Mincha, Yom Tov, Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh, Purim. What's so important about hearing the king read the Torah in the Beis HaMikdash? So the explanation is not so much what was read, but it was who read it. The king, the ideal of the king is that he is a person who is the embodiment of the ideal Jew. Meaning to say, really and truly the king, we're talking about Melech Yisrael HaKshedim, is someone who has actualized the ideal of living a godly life. So when you see the king saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, you became inspired that indeed that's the way it is, because you see the king reading it, and he means it, and it's real. You see somebody actually living that way, right? So that inspires the person saying, oh, maybe I should try to aspire to that as well. So Mordechai HaTzadik, who was the embodiment of learning Torah at the very highest level, as we said, Torah Lishma, when he inspired the Yid to learn Torah b'mesiras nefesh, he inspired him to actualize in his daily life, in his defining features, in his characteristics, in the chibur, in his metzias, in his existence, in his being, the very highest ideals.
I'm a bit mixed up. Is the learning Torah day and night, Amal Torah, is that the aspect of Bittul?
Yes.
So there's 4 in that model.
It's bittul in the sense, let's put it this way, it's not yet the ultimate expression of the very highest ideal in the mitzias, in the being, in the characteristics of the person. Why? Because Vagisa is still a mitzvah. You should learn Torah day and night. Learning Torah Lishma, it's the closest state that you get to non-existence, so to speak. In other words, to me not being considered at all, or rather, I don't consider myself. And notwithstanding that, I connect to Torah at the very highest levels. And what do? I learn Torah Lishma to the extent that any other boundaries and barriers that my guf might put on me, whether it's because I have to do business, or I have to earn a living, or I have to look after the family, so on and so forth, it pushes through even that. It doesn't mean that I suddenly become a limitless being, because at the end of the day, a person has 24 hours in the day. But to the extent that a person could be so totally committed to something, that's the idea of Lishma. So you need both things. On the one hand, it's me not being considered at all, or to the greatest extent possible, and nevertheless finding expression in me, in my seichel, in my commitment, in my daily life. And that's when you have the ultimate expression of the very highest levels into the tachten, the greatest tachten possible. That's the word. Now, we have to understand what's this business about the 22,000 children. Valpisa, according to this, we could also explain Gam Hashemevi Ba Maimer, also that which is brought in the Maimer. Shemor the Chakibit Chaf Beis Elef Tineke Shabbos Rabban. He gathered together 22,000 young children, and he learned Torah with them. Why? What's with the children? Why is it necessary to bring the children into this? Again, because we're trying to get to the ultimate state of the very highest, the very essence finding expression in the very lowest, right? This quality of learning Torah as it is in a state of completeness, both from the perspective of the soul and the body, you mainly find this in young children learning Torah. What does that mean? Why? But Yuval said this will be understood based on that which our sages teach in the Talmud of Shabbos. The Talmud says, the world only exists, continues to exist, because of the breath of young children learning Torah. That's what the Talmud states. So when this statement was made, Rav Papa, one of the greatest sages in the Talmud, turned to one of the other great sages in the Talmud, Abaya, and he said, what about my Torah and your Torah? What is that? Is that Tesnizat? That's you're making such a statement. We're sitting and learning Torah at a very high level. Why the breath of young children learning Torah? So Abaya answered him, you cannot compare breath that has no sin in it. I'm sorry. You cannot compare breath that has sin in it to breath that has no sin in it. What does it mean? Page Memches. Although the learning, it's certainly the learning of the Torah and Rav and Abaya, they learned it lishma for the sake of learning Torah at the very highest levels. There's no question about that. And on the other hand, why does a child learn Torah at the very basic level? Because of fear of the rod, meaning to say, he's being told that he has to learn Torah. So the child is not constantly aware that he's learning Torah at the very highest levels. He's learning Torah because he's being told to do so. And he's afraid that if he won't, if he'll step out of line, there will be unpleasant consequences. Afal Pikei, nevertheless, Yesh Yisrael behevel teneke shobes rabba. There is a quality possessed in the breath of children that learn Torah over the learning of the Torah of the greatest sages of the Talmud. Why? Sha'al hevel zeh dafke ha'olam iskayim, and because of which the world only continues to exist in the merit of the breath of children's learning Torah. What's the pshat? What is the meaning? So the explanation of this is known. The Rebbe says, this is from the Mittel Rebbe. So the Bittel Rebbe explains the Hamayle behevel tineke shabis rabban hu mitzad nishmosam. The quality that young children learning Torah possess is because of their soul. What does that mean? Their soul, the souls of children, are closer to God, to godliness. Why? They have just recently descended from the spiritual world into our world. So they're recent, they're fresh, their souls are fresh. That's so far as the soul is concerned. And also their bodies, also from the perspective of their bodies, they also possess an advantage over the greatest sages learning Torah, even at the highest level. The Hein mitzad haguf also because of the mitzad haguf shalem, because of their body. Why? Their body has yet not become as coarse as the older ones through eating and drinking and through material desires, fulfilling material desires. The nefesh habamis, the guf and the nefesh habamis is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it becomes. The more a person engages in eating and drinking and enjoying materialism, the more coarse his body becomes. A young child who was just recently born, his body is more refined, is less vergrept. Right? As explained in a different place at length. So therefore, since children possess a quality, both from the perspective of their souls and from their bodies, that the greatest sages do not possess, therefore the world stands specifically on the breadth of children who are learning Torah. Based on this, we can say, in other words, why does the previous Rebbe bring this idea that Mordechai gathered 22,000 children? What's that? How is that relevant to the explanation we're giving here in terms of what Purim added in bringing Matan Torah to a state of completeness? Because with this, he wants to bring out exactly this point. That it was not only because of the fact that the body and the soul were overridden, that their defining characteristics were nisbatel, were nullified. He wants to bring out, no, it was necessary to have a body and a soul that actualized this ideal. So that highlights this point even more. Where? By introducing the fact that Mordechai gathered 22,000 children. They possessed a shleimus, a completeness, a quality in their souls and in their bodies, in the defining features of their souls and their bodies, which brought down this idea of shleimus, of wholesomeness and completeness in Matan Torah during the period of Purim. So if that's the case, so in other words, we needed this. We needed the children, and we also needed Mesiras Nefesh. If you're saying that there's a special quality that the children possess because of the fact that it's hevel she'en bechet, that it's breath that has no sin, as we just explained. So what's the idea of Mesiras Nefesh? What's the correlation between the two? So this is what the Rebbe explains in the brackets. The fact that they possess this special quality in their body and in their soul is not so much directly related to their learning. It's just a quality that they possess. They are just more refined. Their bodies are less coarse and more refined. And number two, their souls have just descended from on high. That's not really connected to the learning of Torah. Why? On the contrary, why are they actually learning Torah? Because they're more refined consciously. Why are they learning Torah? Yirus HaNetzua, the fear of the rod, the fear of the consequences. Right? So because of that, they also do not have the nullification that comes about through what? Through Mesiras Nefesh. Through self-sacrifice. Maybe that's why the previous Rebbe brings in this Maimer, that the learning of Torah with the children was through Mordechai, through the fact that their learning of Torah was through Mordechai, then their learning of the Torah was also self-sacrifice, with self-sacrifice. So in other words, the children, when Mordechai learned Torah with the children, you had both qualities. On the one hand, you had the quality of the breath of the children that's pure, that has no sin. So you had the special quality that they possess, both from the perspective of the soul and the body. And you also had, through Mordechai learning with them, the self-sacrifice of the children. Because if you remember, when Haman came, Mordechai said to the children, run away. Don't Join me in my faith. And what did they say to him? Itchoi anachnu bein l'chaim bein l'mavos. We are with you in life and in death. So Mordechai introduced Mesiras Nefesh into the learning of the children. And through this process, it brought the entire Matan Torah to the state of completeness. The last few lines and the conclusion of the Maimer, please God, in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow.